everybody. This is So Many Sequels. I'm Josh.
I'm Andrew.
I'm David.
And I'm Nikki.
Oh, man.
We got Nikki on the show. We had to have Nikki join us for this episode for so many reasons. It's Disney Pixar, which you and David are experts of. And also, so we're talking about Turning Red today, which is the new Pixar movie. And it is very much a women-driven film. And we wanted to make sure it wasn't just all boring men talking about it. So
that's why we have the Batman. And
yeah, I wasn't on that one.
That's fair. That's fair. So yeah, talking about Turning Red today, brand new Pixar movie out now on Disney Plus. It is basically to break it down, a story about a girl who is 13. She's growing up in the early 2000s. And as she's finding this moment in her life where when her emotions start to get out of control, she turns into a big red panda.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of metaphors in there, and it was a pretty fun movie. So without further ado, anyone just itching to jump first and tell us what your thoughts were on the movie?
Nikki, why don't you go first?
That's
Sure, thanks. So listen, I understand this movie was not entirely made for me. I do. I get that. However, as someone who turned 14 in the year 2002 and was obsessed, and I do mean obsessed with a boy band, this movie spoke to me louder than any Disney movie has in the history of Disney. There is a moment, and I've told it to everybody when I've talked about this movie because it just made me laugh so hard. It's very early in the movie. May has 3 girlfriends, and they go to a store after school, and there's this guy that goes to their school who the girlfriends think is really cute, and they're all like talking about him and how cute they think he is. And May is just not having it at all. And she holds up one of those like early 2000s teeny bumper magazines, and she says, "Need I remind you what a real man looks like?" And I made David pause the movie because I was laughing so hard. 2002 Nikki was screaming in that moment. I thought it was because I said things like that. Like, this movie, it just so perfectly captured what being a teenage girl, not in this country because it is in Canada, but on this side of the world in the early 2000s, what that experience was like. It so perfectly captured it. I just kept telling David again and again and again, you have met 14-year-old Nikki today. This is what it was like.
And
Red Panda and all. I mean, really, Red Panda and all. My parents watched it last night too, and my mom says that I was not as disrespectful as May was, which surprised me because I didn't really feel like May was that disrespectful. But other than that, this is definitely what the teenage girl experience was like in the early 2000s, and I just loved it. Thank you, Pixar. I just loved this movie.
To slightly bounce off that, I humbly put my hand on Nikki when she told me that that's what her 14-year-old was, and I was like, "Oh, I know. Like I've been around you and your mom. There's no secret as to how what you were like. You have tons of pictures, tons of embarrassing things that you have that I have uncovered." So as I said to her, this was just coloring in the picture for me.
And even last night we had that conversation because there's like moments where May like doodles pictures of boys that she likes in her notebook and she does all the things. I didn't do that because I'm not an artist by any stretch of the imagination. But I did go back and grab some stuff that we have here at the house that I had as a high school student. And sure enough, it is all hearts and names of boys that I liked and poems that I wrote and short stories that I wrote.
do you have a page of you practicing like writing your name with a different last name? Yeah,
So
busted.
many.
Gotta practice your signature.
Oh my God. Yeah. I don't know if I have time to tell this story. So my parents really freaked me out in the early days of the internet by talking about they can get your information and they can find you and they can do all this. So never put your real information on the internet. And so if there was ever like websites that I would have to sign up for where they would ask for your name, I would put my first name, but then I would put the last name of my favorite boy bander
That's incredible.
as if I
wanna
had
tell
his
them?
last name.
Do you want to tell them who you were all about back then?
I feel like you have to now.
Lance Bass of NSYNC.
Yeah.
That went well, didn't it?
That one,
Hey,
he is.
Fantastic.
I love
He's fantastic. I did a lot of laughing when he came out in 2005. I laughed a lot. But so anyway, I did a lot of that. And then the next thing we knew, we started getting things in the mail addressed to Nikki Bass. And then, oh guys, it gets so much better. A couple of years ago, I was like looking on one of those like background check websites to see what you what you could find out about yourself. And I like looked up myself, and it had a like previous last names thing. And I took David's last name when we got married, so I do have a maiden name. But under previous identities, one of them was Nikki Bass.
this is premium content.
This is exactly what we had
Content.
so.
I don't even mind. Wow.
I think
It's still
I think a big part of this movie is that coming of age perspective. And I think it really put you in that mindset. It put me in that mindset of
Mhm.
02. I was 12 in 02, but I turned 13 within the time frame of this movie. And while not being able to relate from necessarily the female perspective, it very much put me in that headspace of being 13. I had dramatic clashes with my dad, or trying to figure just who I was supposed to be now, because you are going from, in a lot of cases, you're going from elementary school to middle school, or middle school to some kind of maybe junior high school thing like that. There's a lot of confusing emotions for, I think, young boys and girls. If anything, I was probably very much, minus the sports component, I was probably like the Tyler character in this movie, because I was obnoxious. I was a dork, and I also was very quietly also obsessed with
I was
instinct.
gonna say
I thought JC Chazé was like the coolest guy ever. Like I know that people like Justin. I was like, JC, people overlook him. So I definitely,
agreed.
this is what I always say. So I thought this movie was great. I really did. I thought this movie I think it's potentially like a top 10 Pixar movie, because it also does what I think the best Pixar movies do, minus say Toy Story films. And that's, it looks unique. It feels unique to anything else Pixar's done. There are some Pixar movies that look and feel the same, but the best ones have their own style and their own look and their own voice. And I think this has all that. The leadership team is mostly female. The style is, it's like a weird mix. There's a lot of like Sailor Moon and anime influence in it. It reminds me a lot of like Mitchell's versus the Machines, in how there's a lot of like quick motion. There's a lot of things, like the way the animations are, they're not like always smooth. They're like, exactly. Yeah. And then there's also like her narrating her own video, which we all tried to do when we were kids, was like narrate our own home videos. So it definitely put me in a very familiar place. So I think I don't think you have to have grown up in that time period to relate to the movie, but boy, it really does frame it for you if you were a 2000s, like late 90s, early 2000s kid. What did you guys think?
Yeah, Andrew, what did you think?
Well, in 2002, that's when this takes place.
Yeah.
I was tender age of 16
Okay.
and almost 17, 16, 17. And I was a 17-year-old girl living in Bartlesville. And I can easily relate to that. The boy band mania, like, I wasn't really big with this, but I will say that, like, I loved this movie primarily because I love it when movies like this explore culture. And this has culture galore.
Yeah.
And I think it's great in representing that. I love the fact that I love the fact that we get this whole like explosion of culture on this. The comedy in it is really good, as well as the timing. I did notice that, the animation was a little bit like really rapid, because it's just, you just pay attention to how they, kind of like David was saying, just how they just move back and forth really quick. And honestly, I really like that. So There's not too many bad things I can say about this. I really like this. There were times when I was looking at it and I was like, I know it's a Pixar movie. Pixar and Disney pretty much hand in hand. This is a Disney film. Like, this is a Disney film. I don't really necessarily know if this is a Pixar film. I would say definitely this is one of Pixar's best efforts, because I don't want to say they've made a bad movie. They've made some bad ones. They've made some ones that are not good. I won't say which ones are which. It's definitely, I will say that, like, last summer's Luca was okay. I feel like this is better than Luca.
Interesting. Interesting.
And that's my hot.
I'll let that be said.
Yeah, and I'll let you say it. I think you know what? This show's on a timer.
I have 5 words. I said what I said.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. I say that I like what you said, Nikki. I feel like this is the first Pixar movie to really like narrow in on a certain point of time and age that felt really targeted at me. I was 12 in 2002. May is 13. You were 14. David was 12-ish, and Andrew was driving. So there's a little bit of a gap there in that regard, but it still felt really targeted at me. The early 2000s nostalgia at play is so good, from the music to like the small details, like the Tamagotchis that are present throughout, and then just some of the really super painful moments of cringe that only pubescent teenagers can understand.
Y'all, she named her Tamagotchi Robert Jr.
Right?
after her favorite boy band member.
If anyone here or listening has seen Pin 15 on Hulu, it feels like the Pixar version of that. It's the cleaner version of that show. So if you're a millennial girl who grew up like weird and obsessed with boy bands, this is a straight up home run. But also, really just anyone who ever went through puberty, I feel like should relate to this movie pretty strongly, because no matter what year or decade it's in, you face weird emotions that you're not used to, weird changes in your body you're not used to. You definitely clash with your parents in a way that you hadn't before. And you're learning a lot. You're learning about how your family can go beyond just the blood. Your friends can be your family, and that's okay. And it doesn't mean that you have to choose one or the other. But that's a thing that May faces. She's trying to find who she is. And it's just so much that I could relate to, just as someone who grew up. So I feel like this should be a pretty easily relatable movie, which is why some of the feedback has surprised me a bit.
Yeah.
You know, and
Sorry.
you know, I was just gonna say that, and Nikki, you had said that, I think you said your mom, or who was it that said that that May was a little too disrespectful?
My mom.
Yeah, I've heard some of that too.
But because I did come from, and that was something else that I really identified with. My parents are amazing, wonderful people.
Sure.
I did come from a very conservative Christian home. And I do think that maybe some of that made me wear some goggles about this movie, because May's parents are very much the same way. Different cultures, obviously, but there is that expectation. And that was something else that I really identified with, was that desire that May has to please her parents, to the point that she doesn't necessarily feel like she can tell them everything. I did relate to that a lot, where it was, I just want them to be proud of me, and I want them to be able to brag about me to their friends and be able to celebrate me. And maybe they wouldn't necessarily do that if they found out that this was going on. I identified with that. I got that.
And I think that I saw a lot of, I think Nikki was this way too, and Josh, Andrew, you might have been this way too. I think when you start to turn 13 and people start to tell you you're becoming an adult in a little bit of a way, you start to, and May reflects this, act like you're a little bit of an adult. You like to, talk to people about how's the grind going and things like that. You start to try to relate to adults. And so you try to act a little bit more grown up. Yeah. And you don't really have the full context of what exactly that means. So you start to think like, you're developing your own opinions, but you're still like unsure about if your parents are going to approve of it. It's kind of.
What was weird to me about a lot of the backlash that it's getting is that she acknowledges in the beginning that, no, I'm not my own person. Like, I want to be my own person and I am this person. And she says, I'm me 24/7, 365, which, oh God, again, 2002 Nikki was like, oh, here I am. But then she does say, but then sometimes, no, I'm not. There's someone else I have to be too. And it's that person that her parents expect her to be. And she has that struggle as she gets into the movie of trying to figure it out and trying to make both of these people meet. This person that she wants to be and the person her parents want her to be, trying to make those two people meet somewhere.
Yeah. You had something, Andrew. I don't want to lose it. What did you?
I'm sorry, Andrew. Yeah.
No, I'm sorry. I forgot what I was going to say. But
Beautiful.
I'm
Nice.
sorry.
I have
no,
some.
I think that was my fault. My bad.
That's okay. I have something. Maybe it'll jog your memory on this, Andrew, because I do got to say that I think they did an incredibly good job. I think at you talked about the cringe levels at times, Josh.
Yeah.
Did a great job of crafting the scenarios for this movie. I had made like sitting here in my living as a 32-year-old man. I suddenly got massive secondhand embarrassment for her when she stormed into the Quick Mart to confront this 17-year-old boy with pictures her daughter had drawn of her daughter. Like I was like she was embarrassed, but I was also like, oh my gosh, I would be
kept hoping
so
that was like
embarrassed
a
if my mom did anything like that.
And the drawings were so much worse than you expected, right?
Yeah.
Like she drew them as half mermaid.
Yeah.
And that was like the final nail in the coffin for me on that, because 13-year-olds do weird stuff. We all do weird stuff. And no matter how normal that shared experience is, every 13-year-old thinks they're the weirdest one ever.
Yeah.
So to see that unfold just makes you go back to whatever weird thing you're embarrassed about, I think. Because it wasn't so weird that it was unbelievable, you know?
No, it was very believable. And that's why it was like I started like my back started to sweat. I was like, oh gosh, I would be so embarrassed if my mom or dad did something like that. And it happens at other times too, where you're just like, your parents are trying to protect you, they think, and stuff. But sometimes you're just like, oh, please, can we just get out of here? Everybody that I know is watching this moment. And it's weird for the 17-year-old kid too. He's like looking at it, what did this 13-year-old girl draw of me? Very weird stuff. But I also really appreciate that the voices, I think most of the voices for the friend group, for the girl group, are young kids. They are. So like they have that really authentic 13, 14-year-old sound to their voice, as opposed to being, by contrast, not that this is a knock, but by contrast, you have like in Encanto, where Mirabel is played by a woman in her like late 30s. And I think that you have that sort of like raw, I think the director calls it like a perfect imperfection of May's voice, where she sounds like a kid. And I love when movies do that, when they go for actual child actors.
Yeah. I also wanted to touch on the music and Four Town in general for a little bit, because I was really impressed with how much these songs sounded like 2000s boy band songs. And when I found out that they were written by Billie Eilish and her brother Phineas O'Connell, my like jaw dropped, because this is not what their music sounds like. And so it really just showed me their talent on display. And I drove around a little bit this morning and listened to the 3 Four Town songs that are on the soundtrack. And
there's something, whether it's NSYNC or Backstreet Boys or 98 Degrees or O-Town, isn't that one of them? Or what are some other ones?
I assumed Four Town was a play on O-Town.
No New Kids on the Block, maybe. I don't know. Whatever the other ones are, Nikki could probably come up with more. But whoever, like, there is that very identifiable, I don't even know what you would call it. It's not like, it's like pop, but it's also, there's a little bit of like weird synth in there. It's like mixed. There's harmonies going on that sound like it. And when you hit it right on the hit, honestly, I don't know if you guys watched the show, but it really reminded me of Bob's Burgers and the boy band on that show, which is, what's the name of that show? What's the name of that band? Do you remember?
Oh gosh, it's something about boys.
Sorry, he's upset.
Happens.
4 Boys or something like that.
Oh.
Boys for Now. Yes, that's it. Boys for Now. Yeah. Boys for Now have some pretty good hits too. Oh, there goes the dog. All right. Everything's falling apart on the Prock side of the place. Hang on.
Did you like the music, Andrew? You
Yeah,
said
you
you weren't
talk
a
about the
big
music
band
first.
guy at the time, but what did you think of it?
I did like the music. I was very surprised that it was Billie Eilish and her brother Phineas.
Yeah.
Like it blew me away. I'm like, these are actually really good. Wait a second. They're who? They're what?
I know, right? Phineas is one of the members of Four Town too.
See, I didn't know that. And like I knew nothing of Four Town. But the other things that like the score was done by Ludwig Göransson.
Uh-huh.
And he's done a lot of music. He did the Black Panther soundtrack, he did the Tenet soundtrack, and he goes from Black Panther to Tenet to Turning Red. And
Yeah.
it's still like really good. Like his whole creative list is still amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. I
No,
thought it was pretty good
I
too.
thought the music. I'm sorry, what?
I was going to say, yeah, I thought the score was pretty good too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Ludwig did a good job.
You did do a good job, and so did Billy and Phineas.
Yes. Yes. We haven't talked a lot about the panda aspect of the movie yet. I don't even really know where to begin with it because I feel like this is the panda can be a metaphor for whatever you choose it to be. In the movie, it is directly tied to her emotions, but it's also something that in May's family is only passed down through the women.
Yeah.
And again, speaking as a man, I know that women are expected to control their emotions sometimes publicly in a way that men are not. They're not supposed to get angry because then they're hysterical. They're not supposed to get overly emotional. And so I felt like that the panda was used really well to portray that.
Yeah.
And that it came down to May having to choose to just to accept his panda or her panda and not have to worry about that. How did you feel about the panda?
I felt like it was adulthood.
Yeah, that works too.
I felt like it was adulthood because of 13. It's like what you said, just 13 is such a just a really strange year.
It is.
It's you're entering your teenage years, and then all of a sudden everything just goes whichever way it goes. But the thing is that's also like the beginning signs of adulthood. You can say whatever year it is, but that really is year you really stop being a kid.
Yes, I agree with that.
And the thing about the red panda, it's interesting that you point out that it's your emotions. I also think that's another thing, but I think the red panda itself is just like adulthood, because the other women in the story were knew how to control it, and she
Yeah.
did.
Right. And they were also very adamant that she had to.
Yeah.
You have to control it. You have to complete this ritual. It's not an option. And that just, and in her 13-year-old mind, May is thinking, well, okay, yeah, but also this concert's way more important to me.
Yeah.
Which is what a 13-year-old would think.
Yep.
Yeah. I thought that was very reflective of the generational differences.
That
Because
too,
I think
yeah.
the women before my time, and even the women younger than me, I think were really told, keep it in. You don't show your emotions. You don't let that out. That's not something you're allowed to do. And it made me so sad for the mom and for the sisters and even the grandma, because they did suppress it. And then even in the end, I thought, well, maybe they'll be given that chance. Maybe they'll be given that chance to let it out again. And they weren't. They had to give up their pandas again. And that made me so sad for them that they were still not allowed to break that out the way that she was, because I think that women of my generation started to accept that's a really garbage mentality and a really terrible way to look at things. So I thought that was reflective of that.
Yeah, I also think it's very interesting. I think when I first heard the premise for the movie, this happens with every Pixar movie, really, and Disney movie, I go, that doesn't sound like it's going to be very interesting. And then I see it and you go, oh, it works out. It actually worked out really well. I think that it, and from a visual standpoint, I thought the design and the look of May as the panda was really, it worked just like you'd want it to. When she needed to look scary, it was scary. And when it needed to look lovable and fluffy and cute, it did.
When Ming appeared as her looming through the city like Godzilla,
Right.
gasped a little. It was
I did. I went, oh my, that's big.
she's green. And it
That was-
also it demonstrated this whole idea of when you're embarrassed by your parent in public, it does feel like the world has stopped and everyone's looking.
Oh God.
And it's usually not true, but this time they made it so literally true that mom is like ripping the stadium up and making it all about her. It just,
Yeah.
it hurts.
Yeah,
It hurts a little bit.
I just think it's great. I think that there's a great component of this too, and we can talk about the controversies a little bit here because I don't have box office stats.
Yeah, I figured let's just.
There's there's a lot of layers to this that you can relate to on. There's the big controversial review from Cinema Blend that talked about this. There's a lot of different layers that you can relate to this movie on, and it just gets more and more specific as you go down. I think that on a surface level, I think everybody can relate to a coming of age story, and I think on a layer down below that, you can relate to it on coming of age at the turn of the millennium, and then below that, you can relate to it from a cultural standpoint of the Chinese cultural standpoint, and even one further down, Chinese Canadian. What a specific experience that this movie dives down on. But honestly, I think the more specific, the better the story becomes. If this was a really overly broad coming of age story, I don't think it would work the same way. It needed to be a very specific story that someone was trying to tell. And I feel the same way sometimes about Onward. It's very clear that it's a very specific story that the people who are making that movie wanted to tell. So and I think Pixar has been on a kick lately of coming of age stories with the subtraction of Soul. You look at Onward, Luca, and Turning Red, they're all about that midpoint, not being a kid, but not really being like a full blown teenager yet.
Yeah, I think so too. And I also wanted to point out that, David, you mentioned that this movie has a all female leadership team, and it's also the first Pixar movie to be solo directed by yet too. So there's a lot of female influence there that I think shaped the movie in a really good way.
Definitely. And Josh, you retweeted some of the bad takes from Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah, I did.
And there's a lot of parents that are complaining. And Nikki and I talked about this last night. It's really easy for us now, the parents of a 1-year-old, to look to the future and say, "Oh, we'll be cool parents. We're not going to complain about everything they watch or try to get it shut down." And I don't think we're going to try to get it shut down because I don't have that type of mentality. But it's easy now to say that. I'm sure when we get to 9, he gets to be like 9 or 10 years old, and he wants to go see something, I'll be like, "Oh, let me look into this," because it's a little bit about. But the thing is, I think the responsibility is on the parent above all. If you don't think that your kid is mature enough for something, you need to know that, and you need to do the research on it before you even. One of my big ploys is going to be like how is okay. You can watch this, but I got to watch it with you. And if he's like, "Oh, I don't want to do that," it's like, okay, it's probably a movie you shouldn't be watching anyway. Because if you're embarrassed to watch it with me, and you're probably not going to be, I grew up and my parents were fairly generous in terms of what they allowed me to watch. They would look up the ratings and they would see what kind of things it said had in it. But I was able to a lot of times convince them to let me watch a movie that maybe I wasn't quite mature enough for, and sometimes they regretted it.
I think the lesson for Ming and for other parents who might be hesitant about the content, which I say it like it's bad. It's not an inappropriate film. It's the moments that are controversial are everyday life kind of things. Yeah. And the lesson for Ming is that you can't protect your child from everything, especially when they're 12, 13, 14 years old. They're seeing it anyway. The best thing to do is to teach them and not try to hide them from the world. And that's how I feel when I read these reviews of parents who are like, "It's too inappropriate you're being the villain," in my view.
Yeah. I will say, when I started reading some of the more, it's so inappropriate and it's so shocking. Why would you introduce a child to this? I fully expected, oh my God, they're talking about women's periods. I fully expected it to be like explanations of how to use a tampon. Like, I'm in the bathroom and things are happening. Like, I fully expected that level of inappropriateness with the way people talked. And then when I watched it, I was like, a 9-year-old, an 8-year-old isn't going to get it.
No, they wouldn't get it anyway.
Everybody was freaking out about this.
And the whole part of the movie that involves Ming talking about May's period is so small because that is not what it's about. once she realizes, oh no, she's turning into a panda, and then they never mention it again.
They never mention it again.
Because it's not about that.
And friends, I say that gosh, I cringe even saying this, and every bone in my body is saying not to say it. I say that as someone who is very quiet about that part of my life. I talk about that with 4 people, and he's one of them. And even I was like, I don't think I feel about it. This is nothing.
No, this is not. This was pretty tame by comparison. So let's look at the letterbox scores here.
Let's go ahead and start throwing some guesses out there. What do you say?
I'm gonna guess.
Oh,
Go ahead, Andrew.
And I will run the game.
I defer to you, Andrew. I took your spot last week.
Oh, okay. So what am I doing? Am I just guessing?
You're guessing
Okay,
the game.
guess-
You're guessing.
Guess the score.
Okay. My score is 3.6.
Okay.
I'm similarly going to guess a 3.8.
Okay.
Dang it, 3.8 was my guess. 3.6.
That's what Andrew said.
Andrew said that?
Yeah.
It's
Okay. We do have one dead on correct, and that is going to be David with 3.8. That is the letterboxed average score of this movie. Real quick before we dump out, what are our ratings for this? I will start by saying it is. Upon first viewing, it's a 4-star.
For me, I'm going to say 4.5. I'm going to give it a little extra
Bingo. That's
because that cooking scene was so good at the beginning of the movie,
it was.
and making little, I don't know what they're called.
All right. That's Turning Red. Find us online, somanysequels.com. Subscribe to the show and follow us on social media for more. We'll be back next week.